Okay, so welcome everybody to the lecture on the middle section. This is Act 2 and 3 of King Lear. Um, I've got an outline that I've emailed everybody. Um, and just as a reminder, so I'm recording everything, like the whole lecture from beginning to end on Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. So you can, if you're not present, you can sit down and just watch the whole thing for an hour or whatever it takes. But if you want it in smaller chunks, I'm also recording it on iMovie and then kind of trying to do it in smaller chunks so you can watch it in like 15 or 20-minute chunks. And the thing about iMovie is I'm uploading those to YouTube, and YouTube generates closed captioning, so that if you would prefer to be able to read what I'm saying, you can read along, or if you have if you have hearing difficulties or anything like that. So it's basically it's the closest I can get to trying to be ADA compliant by using iMovie. I don't know if anybody's actually been reading the captions on YouTube, and YouTube, if you're listening, you're not doing the best with my captions. It might be that I speak too fast, or it's maybe it's the Shakespearean language is just throwing off poor old YouTube. But there are some unintentionally comic closed captioning happening over there on YouTube. So okay. So I've got three kind of main points. Two of them are kind of bigger points that I want to consider in our discussion of Act 2 and 3 of Lear today. And then I've got kind of two smaller points. So I'm going to start by just kind of mentioning a couple of plot points that I won't necessarily, I just want them to be in your mind or fresh in your mind. But I'm not necessarily going to sort of specifically go through the text of it or anything like that. Then we're going to talk about like a lot that leads up to what happens in Act 2, Scene 4. Act 2, Scene 4 is a kind of real important, it's an important turning point in terms of Lear's character and the arc that he's on and what happens to Lear at that point. We'll talk a little bit about some things that set us up for what happens in 2-4, but Act 2, Scene 4 is a really critical scene, and so we'll spend some time talking about some passages, some discussion, things that happen in Act 2, Scene 4. And then I'll probably take a break at that point. In fact, I'm just going to make a little note to myself that I should pause right there. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about nature, what I'm calling nature versus nature. But nature is kind of like ecological nature, the environment sort of thing, versus human nature and things related to human nature, and how those two things really kind of come together into a big clash, particularly in Act 3, Scene 4. So Act 3, Scene 4 is also a really critical scene in my sort of reading of Lear. So like the two scenes we're going to spend the most time on today are stuff out of Act 2, Scene 4 and stuff out of Act 3, Scene 4. Excuse me. And then I'm not going to pause there, I don't think, because my discussion about Gloucester's eyes and what happens there, that's kind of small. It's a smaller point, so I'll probably just sort of tack that on to the third point of our lecture today. Okay, so there basically I think there'll probably be about two pauses today. So just in terms of like some plot points to remember. So I mean, one that is probably just whatever. So like Shakespeare in this play, as with most plays, Shakespeare is not conforming to the Aristotelian or the classical unities, right? Unity of time, unity of place, unity of action. So the play is taking place over the course of several days, weeks maybe. It's taking place in a couple of different locations. And so it's worth keeping in mind. And if you're ever lost about the location, at the beginning of every scene, like it's not like Shakespeare's text, like the actual what's in the folio or the quarto, that doesn't specify these things. And so these are editorial conventions, editorial apparatus. But in our text, at the bottom of every at the bottom where all the footnotes and stuff are, at the start of every scene, the editor tries to give you a sense of where the scene is taking place. And so it's worth keeping in mind, right, that Lear is, if you recall back the lecture we talked about last time, the beginning of things, when Lear is handing off the responsibility of the crown, he basically wants to go into retirement, right? That's not quite the word that they would have used for what he was doing, but he plans to have this entourage, a retinue, and they're going to basically take turns 1 month at a time with each of his daughters. And he had planned to rotate around 3 daughters. Now he has to go around between Goneril and Regan. And so in Act 1, he started off in Goneril's castle house. And now in Act 2, he's gone off to, he's trying to find Regan, but instead has ended up at Gloucester's estate because Regan well, we'll talk about this in a second, but Reagan has basically, as soon as she got his message, she departed from her mansion, her dwelling, up to Gloucester, and so Lear has gone up to find the Earl of Gloucester, find her at the Earl of Gloucester's. So there's kind of moving around in different places, and then of course there's also an unspecified natural space, which is usually called the Heath, out in the middle of the storm. And then a big chunk of like the last part of the play is happening in and around Dover. Um, if you're at all familiar with geography, Dover is a city down on the southeast coast of Britain, of England, and it's the closest point to the European continent. It's where you can go from Calais, from Dover over to Calais nowadays. Is the kind of the closest point between England and France. And so a lot of stuff is happening there. You probably have certain associations with Dover, the White Cliffs of Dover, and things like that. That's going to be important for Act 4. Okay, so when I was in your guys' shoes, when I was an undergrad, and I read this play, I had a really hard time. This is still on plot point number one here, but of keeping track or keeping straight the difference between Cornwall and Albany. It's important, I think, for this play to understand the difference between them, right? That is the Earl of Cornwall, the Earl of Albany. They are they're the in-laws, right? They've married into Lear's family, and Albany is he's married to Goneril, the oldest daughter, and he's a bit, I wouldn't say henpecked, right? But I mean, I think she treats him as um, a milk toast, right? Kind of, she thinks he's too nice. She actually uses that phrase about milk livered, which means white livered, and a white liver is supposed to be a bloodless liver, and therefore one that's kind of cowardly and so on. She treats him as kind of too retiring, too weak, too passive, and that sort of thing. And in the end, I mean, he is going to be loyal to Lear, right? I mean, he sees Lear as, he understands what Lear has done, even if he doesn't agree with it, and he's trying to be supportive of that choice of Lear's. And he's being pushed around or Goneril's trying to push him around and calls him cowardly and all that kind of stuff. Cornwall, on the other hand, who's married to the second daughter, to Regan, is he is aggressive, he's cruel, he's mean, and so I guess what I would say is when I first read this play, when I was in your guys' shoes, I basically I didn't have a good way of differentiating them. They just kind of seemed really interchangeable to me because they were just the in-laws, right? Just the sons who have married into these two terrible women, Lear's older daughters, and but it is important, right, that Cornwall is cruel and vicious and kind of lording it over people, and that Albany is, I wouldn't call him passive, right? I mean, that's Goneril's kind of view of him. I would call him more, like loyal, right, and just good, in a way that Cornwall is not. Okay, and okay, so that's one point. Second, and so there are various points in the play. Well, let me say one other thing, and then I'll come back to this. And it's also worth keeping in mind that Cordelia is, who's married the King of France now. She's gone and lived in France, but from very early on, it appears that there's a French invasion that is coming to Britain to try to undo some of the damage that Lear has already done, right, and to put Lear back on the throne or something like that, right? And so, first of all, that's material that's out of the chronicle history, right? The legendary history of King Lear and his daughters that that's in Holinshed and various other kind of historical sources that Shakespeare would have been aware of. It's in that competing play, the romance version of Lear that the other company had put together. And so, this threat of civil war, this threat of invasion is happening at the same time that there also seems to be a civil war, right? Like Albany and Cornwall. Again, this is something I didn't really pick up on very clearly when I was more focused on, when I was an undergrad and I was in your shoes, I was more focused on the fact that Cordelia was trying to kind of restore her father and not paying as close attention to the fact that there's also, looks like there's a civil war. So there's a couple of allusions to the fact that there's a division between the dukes, right? That Cornwall and Albany are themselves at odds with each other. And so, I mean, to an extent, this is a similar situation to the background in Macbeth. That is, that you've got, on the one hand, civil war, right? Rebellions within each other, right? The powers that are confined within Britain are themselves at odds with each other. And laid on top of that is the fact that you've got what's technically a foreign invasion because it's a French army, under the banner of Cordelia, the dispossessed youngest daughter, and so on. So that's kind of in the background. That is the thing that is going to be, that is awareness of the plot of Cordelia's, of invading and so on. That is the basis for accusing various people in this play of treason, right? So um, Kent seems to be aware of this. It doesn't matter because he's already been banished, and if he was found uh, outside of his disguise, he could be executed for having violated that banishment, that exile. But Gloucester, right, who is himself loyal to Lear, right? He's kind of in a position similar to the Duke of York and Richard II, right? That is, he's a nobleman. He's entrusted with a lot of responsibility in helping to run the kingdom. Um, and he's got this kind of complex loyalty situation because, on the one hand, Lear has shed all of his royal authority. Right, he's no longer acting as a king. He just wants to be treated like a king. So Gloucester, on the one hand, has long service with Lear and feels loyal and duty bound to Lear, but at the same time, Cornwall in particular expects Gloucester to do certain things for him, right? He's the consigliere, the fixer kind of figure, and Gloucester doesn't want to do that, right? So when Cornwall wants to punish Lear, wants to leave him out in the storm, doesn't care if Lear dies in the midst of this big storm, um, Gloucester feels human sympathy for him. He feels like personal loyalty to him. He feels friendship to him, and so he's aware of the fact that he's going against his duty. So this is one of the things that puts Gloucester at odds with Cornwall. But then the second thing that puts Gloucester at odds with Cornwall is the fact that he is aware that Cordelia is bringing an armed invasion, and he is not actively assisting Cornwall, right? That he is promoting Cordelia's return, and he has evidence of that. He has these letters, right? And so when Edmund betrays Gloucester to Cornwall, it's based on, because Gloucester has put misplaced trust in his son Edmund, right? He's misjudged who Edmund is, so he tells him that he has this letter that he's hidden away in his bedroom, basically, and so it's that is the kind of clinches the deal against Gloucester and makes him guilty. Okay, the play is all, at this point, the play is full of dramatic ironies, and that's another thing that, if you're just reading the play, it can be really easy to kind of overlook it or misrecognize these things or not understand that that's happening. So the play is telling you, here's Edgar speaking, here's Edmund speaking, but it's not telling, and here's Kent speaking, but it's not telling you that Edgar is pretending to be possessed by a devil, that Edgar is in disguise and therefore not recognized, particularly by his father. It's not telling you, Kent is in disguise. So even though Kent and Lear are officially kind of at odds with each other, Kent is still trying to help Lear and is in disguise there to try to help him. It's not telling you, right, that Edmund is a villain, that Edmund is intent on destroying Gloucester. And so, when Gloucester says, praises Edmund in various ways in Act 2 and Act 3, there's an irony about that, right? Because Gloucester believes that Edmund is the better son, the loyal son, when in fact Edmund is working to destroy Gloucester and to destroy his legitimate brother Edgar. So it creates a ton of dramatic irony all the way through this, and you want to be kind of aware of those kinds of moments, or try to kind of keep in mind those kinds of moments. So like, for instance, when Gloucester in Act 3 comes out to find Lear out on the heath, and Edgar, who is pretending to be possessed, insane and possessed by demons, and he's in disguise. And so when Gloucester and Edgar end up speaking to each other, Gloucester doesn't realize he's speaking to his own son, right? Edgar realizes that's Gloucester, right? But Gloucester doesn't realize that that's Edgar. And so some of what Edgar has to say there is heartfelt and poignant and painful and so on, because Edgar's aware of things that Gloucester is not. Okay, so those are the kind of the just. I'm not going to say too much else about them right now, but I just want those kind of to keep those in the back of your mind in case you didn't pick up on those things as you were reading. Okay, so the first big point of our lecture today, though, this is point two on the syllabus, on the outline, is shocking Lear, and by this I mean so one of the things that so I think one of the things I would say about Lear's journey, like the things that happened to Lear over the course of the tragedy, um, it's partly about, or I would say it's partly about Lear coming to a better understanding of himself, right? So as the play begins, as the tragedy begins, so back in Act One, Lear is pompous and vain and susceptible to flattery, right? He has been a king for some amount of time. He's got a lot of yes men around him. He's not used to being contradicted by people when he's making the wrong choices, and maybe he hasn't made that many wrong choices. But regardless, he's not used to being contradicted, right? This is why he flies off the handle at Kent when Kent tries to step between him and Cordelia, and that the situation that he tries to set up for himself in Act One is a very strange one, right? Like he wants all of the ceremonial and superficial stuff, all the honor and prestige and deference and recognition that comes with being a king, right? So this is why he demands the title of king. This is why he demands that his daughters will pay for his retinue, his followers of the group that's going to follow him around and so on. So he wants all the trappings of kingship, but he doesn't want any of the responsibility of kingship, right? And like in normal circumstances, that's not the kind of thing that happens. And so it's a peculiar situation that he's trying to set up for himself. And I mean, the thing that he wants, right, is he wants all the things that make a person feel good, I suppose. I mean, I have no idea what it's like to be a monarch, but like people bowing and curtsying and calling you by exalted titles and so on, and living without any kind of, living totally carefree and so on. And he doesn't really have any like he hasn't ever really had to kind of deal with like the common humanity of things, right? Like what it's like to feel hunger, what it's like to feel cold, what it's like to um, uh, to feel need or necessity, right? Because everything has always been taken care of for him, and he expects that to be the case still, right? Um, and so one of the things that happens to him over the course of the tragedy is that he's forced to confront like his basic nature, right? Like in a way that that Macbeth. So I see Julie Gray's up there, right? So Julie's writing a paper about nature and different concepts of nature, particularly in Macbeth. Well, I mean, the way that nature is kind of being treated in King Lear, it's kind of maybe a little bit different than what Shakespeare has to say in Macbeth. But I mean, it is that same. Like there are all these different ideas about what constitutes nature in this play. We talked about Edmund, his soliloquy in Act One, Scene Two, "Nature, thou art my goddess," um, and like basically Lear has to kind of confront human nature, right? Like come down to understand like what is the common the common denominator for all humanity and so on, right? So that's part of the thing is like watch or is experiencing this kind of shocking revelation to Lear that happens over the course of this tragedy. And then, I mean, it's debatable, and we can talk about this in our final discussion next week. To what extent Lear learns some kind of lesson from all of this, the difficulties that he finds himself going through. Okay, so just to set up a couple things, right? So, in Act One, like Lear is trying to enjoy the all that kind of the happy aspects of being a monarch, right? And Goneril, you know, was she already like this beforehand, or is it that she's become exasperated with the fact that he has all the fun and not any of the responsibility? But she's trying to pick a fight with him from very early on. Act 1, Scene 3, that discussion between her and Oswald is about, she has a discussion about, like, try to offend him, try to insult him. I want him to have to leave here in pique and see what happens. And so, at the end of Act 1, we see him leaving, right? Leaving Goneril's residence, having been, offended by the fact that Goneril is not giving him the deference that he expected, and not giving him for him, one of the ways, deference is maybe one way of talking about it, but in a very specific way, one of the things that really bothers Lear is that he understands his daughters to be ungrateful, right? That they are enjoying the elevation of their status to co-monarchs of Britain, because he has handed off those responsibilities, right? And that they aren't repaying, and he feels like he's only asking for a little bit in return. He wants them to pay for his retinue, and he wants them to, give him respect and basically pay for his upkeep or whatever. And so he sees this as ingratitude. That's the language that he particularly uses, right? Because he has endowed them, lifted them up, and now they're not kind of responding to that. And part of that, we'll talk about that, but part of it is like a concept of the gift, right? Like he claims that what he's done for his daughters is he's given them a gift, and that they're being ungrateful, right? I've given you the gift of handing you the kingdom while I'm still alive, instead of waiting for me to die. And here you are being ungrateful, except for it wasn't a gift, right? It's a gift with strings attached, and that's not really a gift, right? Gifting and gift culture, and thinking about the anthropologically, like what we think about as gifts and so on, that's an interesting question. A gift economy kind of sets up, if you give a gift, then you're supposed to get a gift, and blah, blah, blah. But this is not quite that way, right? He really does expect it's a kind of contractual thing. And that doesn't really sound like a gift. And then it doesn't really sound like something that you have to worry about in terms of gratitude and gratefulness and so on. And then that goes all the way back to what Cordelia says when, Lear is asking, which of my daughters loves me the most? And Cordelia says, I love you the way a daughter is supposed to love her husband. Love her father. And Lear's like, well, that's not enough, right? But she's like, I love you according to my bond. You raised me, and I am grateful. And he doesn't. That's not enough for him, right? And so he's kind of insatiable at the beginning part of the tragedy. Okay, so Act 2, in the part that we read for today, the setting up Lear for a real kind of a shocking sort of, Lear, look, you don't have authority and power anymore, comes in Act 2, Scene 2, right? So we're talking a second ago about, why is Lear having to kind of travel around, and why he ends up in Gloucester's dwelling. And because he was supposed to be going towards Regan's, but he's had to kind of redirect himself, and that's because Goneril and Lear both sent messengers to Regan to let her know that he's on his way. And as soon as and Kent got there first, right? But and Regan and Cornwall didn't really like the message that they were getting from Lear. And then Goneril's messenger Oswald shows up. They read Oswald's message, and they immediately depart for Gloucester's place. And so now Lear has kind of had to redirect up there. And in the interim, Kent has already had this kind of interaction with Oswald, who has been put up to the idea of trying to insult Lear as often as possible. And so they have another argument right at the beginning of Act 2, Scene 2, which is a stop is put to it by Cornwall, and Cornwall puts Kent in the stocks, right? So the stocks, I don't know if you've ever seen like those old Colonial Williamsburg or whatever, like where they have these kind of wood, not cages, but these kind of wood things that, like, they'll go around your arms or they'll go around your legs or whatever, and they hold you in place. And so they put Kent in the stocks, and it's meant to be a kind of a public shaming, right? And Kent warns him, warns Cornwall, who's about to put him in the stocks. This is Act 2, Scene 2 at line 125. It's on page 48 of our text. Cornwall says, bring forth the stocks, ho, you stubborn ancient knave, you reverend braggart, we'll teach you, right? Cornwall's all about teaching people lessons, but the like because Kent has been really pushy with Oswald and not deferential to Cornwall, and he sees Cornwall for kind of who he is, right? So he's not as deferential as Cornwall expects, and so now he's going to be shamed with this being put in the stocks. And Kent says, "This is 123 or so. I am too old to learn." Right? Cornwall will teach you. Kent, I'm too old to learn. Call not your stocks for me. I serve the king, on whose employments I was sent to you. You should do small respect, show too bold malice against the grace and person of my master, stalking his messenger. Right? So I am an agent of, a deputy of, a delegate of the king, and if you are intentionally trying to shame me, that is an insult to the king, to Lear, right? The thing is, or a thing is, that when he says, I serve the king, I mean, what is it? It's a kind of a meaningless thing, right? Lear and Kent, they want, I serve the king to mean something, right? But Lear has given up all of his responsibility. He's given up all of his authority. And so, like pushing around the king's messenger at this point, when you've got a king who's basically toothless, is maybe not that big a deal. Now Gloucester, right, who is in this kind of difficult in the middle position, right? He loves, respects Lear, he wants to serve Lear, feels a duty and responsibility to Lear, but also has a duty to Cornwall as the head, the husband of one of Britain's queens, monarchs. Says at 137, same page here, let me beseech your grace not to do so, right? Don't put Kent in the stocks. His fault as much, right? Because Kent has been so mouthy. His fault as much, and the good king, his master, will check him for it. Your purposed low correction is such a basest, and contempt's wretches for pilferings, your purposed low correction is such as basest and contemned wretches for pilferings and most common trespasses are punished with. Right, putting someone in the stocks, that's for someone who doesn't have any kind of connection and any kind of duty, responsibility for someone of authority, right? The king must take it ill that he's so slightly valued in his messenger, should have him thus restrained, right? If you put Kent in the stocks, that is going to be an insult to Lear, right? The king, right? But again, the problem of what that king is at this point. And Cornwall's, so what, right? And Cornwall and Regan, they're looking for ways to offend Lear at this point, to take him down a couple of pegs, to sort of puncture some of that pomposity of him. And so when we get to Act 2, Scene 4, and Lear is coming up to Gloucester's home, and he finds Gloucester's castle, and he finds his messenger that is Kent, who he doesn't realize is Kent, but that he finds him in the stocks. He kind of can't believe it. Like, did you tell Cornwall that you were here for me? Did you tell Regan that you were my messenger? And Kent's like, yeah, of course I did. And he's like, and they still did this to you? He can't believe it, right? This is Act 2, Scene 4. It's on page 52. Act 2, Scene 4 at around line 14, 15. No, they would not. That is, they would not put you in the stocks if they knew that you were my messenger. Kent, yes, they have. Lear, by Jupiter, I swear, no, they durst not do it. They would not, could not do it. 'Tis worse than murder to do upon respect such violent outrage. Resolve me with all modest haste which way thou mayest deserve, or they purpose this usage coming from us. So you had to have done something serious for them to have, put you in the stocks if they knew that you were my messenger. Kent's like, no, I didn't, right? And so he explains exactly how he ended up here, or as close as possible to exactly how he ended up there. And Lear, he can't believe it, right? He starts to lose some of his control about things. At line 39, this is Act 2, Scene 4, line 39, this is the beginnings of Lear not just not just like angry about being mistreated, but like starting to feel like he's losing his grip on reality. Oh, how this mother swells up toward my heart. Hysteria passio down, though climbing sorrow, thy elements below. Where is this daughter? Right? Okay, I thought the Goneril was just, perverse. But Regan, why would she do this, right? Um, and so he goes looking for them, right? I'm gonna clear this up. I'm gonna go see Regan. I'm gonna get this cleared up. And instead of that, um, Gloucester is being forced by Cornwall to kind of defer Lear's interest, right? Like, I'm not going to come and speak to him. And Lear can't believe that he's being put off, right? He is the king. And here's the Duke of Cornwall and Regan, essentially kind of insulting him, ignoring him. Lear, vengeance, death, plague, confusion, what fiery quality? Sorry, this is Act 2, Scene 4, around line 78 on page 54. Why, Gloucester, Gloucester, I'd speak with the Duke of Cornwall and his wife. Gloucester, aye, my good lord. The king would speak with Cornwall. The dear father would with his daughter speak, commands her service. Right? Like, let's get it all straight here. I am the king, I am a father. I am the king, and my liege lord, my my second, the guy who owes loyalty to me, Cornwall, should come and speak to me when I ask for it. I'm a father. When I say that to my daughter, come and speak to me, she should come and speak to me. Why are these two people who owe me some respect not giving me the respect that I want? Well, he's about to find out, and in fact, the rest of that speech of his. This is Act 2, Scene 4 from around 82 to about 97, has him vacillating here because he doesn't want to confront the reality of where he is, right? I mean, sure, in name, nominally, he is the king, but he's given up all of his authority. He doesn't have any ability to punish Cornwall. What can he do to Cornwall, right? And yeah, nominally he's Regan's father, and should expect that she would, treat him with respect and so on. But I mean, he's also made himself like her dependent, right? He goes from one castle to the next. He needs them to pay for his upkeep and his followers and all this other kind of stuff. So, like what authority does he have over her? And so there's like this fig leaf, right? When Gloucester went to talk to Cornwall and Regan, they said, "Tell him that we're not feeling well, and we'll see him tomorrow." And so now Lear starts to kind of, maybe I have to embrace that. Well, maybe they are feeling sick. Infirmity doth still neglect all office. Maybe they don't understand. Maybe they're so sick that they aren't paying attention to the duty that they owe me, and so on. And he kind of can't really accept that, so he insists on it. Death on my state, he says. This is Act 2, Scene 4. It's on around line 92 on page 55. Wherever should he sit here? This act persuades me that why is Kent in the stocks? That's a sign that this is not just about illness and whatever. This act persuades me that this remotion of the Duke and her is practice only, right? This is all big gain to them. Give me my servant forth. Tell the Duke and his wife that I'll speak with them now, presently. Bid them come forth and hear me, or at their chamber door I'll beat the drum till it cry sleep on death. Right? So I'm just not going to let them get away with pushing me around this way. Well, so Cornwall and Lear and Goneril and Regan are going to come back in at this point, and Lear is like running down Goneril, right? This terrible daughter of mine who has been mistreating me and so on. I've come to you, Regan, because I know that you are gonna show gratitude, right? You are gonna respond to what I've done for you by deferring to me and so on. And she's not really interested in that, right? They're working on taking Lear down more and more pegs. Page 56, Act 2, Scene 4, around line 121. Lear is cursing out Goneril, and then Regan says, "Oh, sir, you are old. Nature in you stands on the very verge of her confine," right? You're almost dead. You should be ruled and led by some discretion that discerns your state better than yourself. Therefore, I pray that to our sister you do make return. Say you have wronged her, sir. And Lear can't believe this. You're telling me I should go back to Goneril and apologize and ask forgiveness? Ask her forgiveness? Do you mark how this becomes the house? Right? Can you imagine a father on his knees in front of his daughter? Oh, daughter, I'm so sorry. Right? And he goes through this whole thing, and she's like, I'm not having any of that. And then, he's trying to kind of, maybe it's not exactly buttering her up, but like trying to kind of position her to do what he considers to be the right thing. This is over on page 57, Act 2, Scene 4, around line 150. You're not the kind, he says, 'tis not in thee to grudge my pleasures, to cut off my train, to bandy hasty words, to scant my sizes, and in conclusion to oppose the bolt against my coming in. Thou, Regan, better knowest the offices of nature, the bond of childhood, effects of courtesy, dues of gratitude. Thy half of the kingdom hast thou not forgot, wherein I thee endow, right? You're going to give me what I expect, right? And Regan, I'm not really interested in that. And then Goneril comes in, and then the two daughters kind of team up on him and really kind of drag him down, right? He can't believe that Regan and Goneril hold hands. Regan cautions him. This is on page 59, Act 2, Scene 4, on line 176. I pray you, Father, being weak seems so, right? And that is the plain truth. It's a truth that Lear doesn't want to hear, but it's the truth, right? You are weak. You've given up all of the kinds of things that might give you authority, all the reasons why people might defer to you. You need to be in a more submissive role relative to our desires for you, right? I pray you, Father, being weak seems so. And if you're going to stick around, I'm going to cut off 50 of your guys. Sorry, you're going to have to go back to Goneril with half of the number of people who were supposed to be with you. And now he starts to lash out at both of them. And she says, why do you even need 50? Maybe you only need 25, she says, around line 214. And then Lear can't believe that she's saying this. 227, I gave you all, right? I gave you all of this stuff. Everything you've got here is from me. How can you be denying me the pomp and circumstance of being a king? And then he says, okay, well, if you only are going to give me 25, I guess I'll go with Goneril because she'll at least have me give me 50. Goneril's like, maybe I won't even give you 50. What do you need 10? Why do you need 5? Why do you need any? That's at line 241. Regan, why do you even need one servant? And Lear's response to this. Now, he's starting to be pricked, his conscience having things ripped away from him and being forced to confront what's left of him. It's going to get worse for him. But this is one speech along the way of kind of like trying to kind of come to terms with what's being said here at 241. This is maybe one of the kind of more famous monologues of his in the play. Why do you need one? Says Regan at 240. And Lear, oh, reason not the need. Our basest beggars are in the poorest thing superfluous. Allow not nature more than nature needs. Man's life is cheap as beasts. Thou art a lady. If only to go warm were gorgeous, why, nature needs not what thou gorgeous wearest, which scarcely keeps thee warm. But for true need, you heavens, give me that patience I need. You see me here, you gods, a poor old fellow, as full of grief as age, wretched in both. If it be if it be you that stirs these daughters' hearts against their father, fool me not so much to bear it tamely. Touch me with a noble anger. So you're right, Regan. I don't need any followers, right? But I am a king, and so I expect these followers, right? And if we're talking about bare necessity, like what we need to kind of keep human life together, you don't need fancy food, you need basic food. You don't need fancy clothes, you just need enough clothes to kind of cover you and keep you warm. And if you're willing to kind of spend for even something above the necessity, then that says that there's something about human nature that we want better than the basic necessity of things. And then there's the gendering of things again here, and again there's some nice kind of parallels with what's happening with Macbeth here. Um, he's starting to tear up a little bit at how he's being mistreated by his daughters. Oh, let not women's weapons water drops stain my man's cheeks, and then kind of this noble anger that he's hoping for. No, you natural hags. And then this is such a painful moment for him. No, you unnatural hags. I will have such revenges on you both that all the world shall. I will do such things. What they are, yet I know not, but they shall be the terrors of the earth. Okay, what could Lear do? What could back up any of the threats that he makes here? Nothing. He's got nothing. He's got no authority. He's got no followers. He's got nothing. Right? So he's totally impotent here. I will have such revenges on you both that the world shall, and then a kind of a recognition. Shall do what? Like, what are you going to do at this point, Lear? And so instead of that, he leaves, right? Goes off into the storm. Gloucester kind of begs, call him back. There's this terrible storm brewing out there. And Regan says at line 278, oh, sir, to willful men, the injuries that they themselves procure must be their schoolmasters. Shut up your doors, right? So he brought this on himself. Let him learn a lesson from all this. A night out in a storm will help him. Maybe it'll calm him down, but maybe it'll help him realize that he needs to be deferential to us now instead of the other way around. Okay, so that's the first big point here, is this idea of shocking Lear, of putting a real kind of a pin in that balloon that of inflated sense of himself, and he's going to be brought down into something. Now, Act 3 is going to lead him through even kind of harsher realizations here. I'm going to stop here for just 1 second.